This short story is based on a Reddit post on r/Let's Not Meet by blue_tidal. He talked about a strange meeting in the middle of the night, out on the streets in the city where he lives. About 5 years ago, I lived in a larger American city. I've always been a night owl, so often when my roommate fell asleep, I got bored and went out for a walk to think by myself. For 4 years, I wandered around the city at night, and nothing ever happened to make me fear for my safety. I used to joke with my roommate that even the city's drug dealers were polite, but one evening, that changed in just a few minutes. It was a Wednesday, sometime between 1 and 2 in the morning. I was walking near a park that the police often patrolled, quite far from my apartment. It was a quiet night, calm and still, with very little traffic and almost no other pedestrians. The park was, as usual, almost completely empty. I had just turned down a short side street to take a different route home than the one I came from when I saw him. At the other end of the street, on the same sidewalk as me, I saw the silhouette of a man dancing. The dance was strange, not entirely unlike a waltz. He ended each step with an odd forward stride. I suppose you could say he was dance walking, right towards me. I thought he was probably drunk and walked as close to the street as I could, so he would have most of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he moved. He was very tall and lanky, wearing an old suit. As he danced closer, I began to make out his face. His eyes were wide open, and his head was slightly tilted back, staring wildly up at the sky. His mouth was twisted into a painfully wide smile that looked like something out of a comic book. After seeing his expression, I decided to cross the street before he got any closer. I looked away from him and focused on crossing the street. When I reached the other side, I glanced back and froze. The man had stopped dancing and stood with one foot in the street, the other on the sidewalk facing me directly. His head was still tilted back, eyes toward the sky, and he had the same smile. This made me very uneasy. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man who didn't move. After walking about half a block, I turned forward for a moment to check the sidewalk ahead of me. The street was completely empty. Still nervous, I quickly looked back, only to find that he had vanished. For a brief second I felt relieved, until I noticed him again. He had crossed the street and was now crouched slightly, bent down. It was dark, and there was some distance between us, so I couldn't see him clearly. But I was sure he was facing me. I hadn't looked away from him for more than 10 seconds, so he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I just stood and stared at him for a while. Then he started moving toward me again. He took huge, exaggerated steps on his tiptoes, like a cartoon character sneaking up on someone. But he moved very, very quickly. I wish I could say I just ran away or grabbed some pepper spray or a phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely paralyzed as the man crept toward me. And then he stopped again, about 5 yards away from me, with the same smile, the same gaze directed at the sky. When I finally got control of my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. I meant to say, "What the hell do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimpering, "What the..." Whether or not people can smell fear, they can definitely hear it. I heard it in my own voice, which scared me even more. But he didn't react at all. He just stood there, smiling like that. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he very slowly turned around and started dance walking away. I didn't want to turn my back on him, so I just watched him go until he was almost out of sight. That's when I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, and he wasn't dancing. I watched in horror as his distant shadow grew larger and larger. He was coming back, and this time, he was running. I ran until I made it off the small side street and onto a larger, better lit street with some traffic. When I looked behind me, I didn't see him. For the rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid grin, but he was never there. I lived in that city for another 6 months after that night, and never went out for a nighttime walk again. Something about his face has always haunted me. He didn't look drunk or high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see.